Nebraska Territory, 1874. The small town of Clearwater stood like a stubborn outcropping against the vast prairie, where the wind carried whispers faster than a galloping stallion. In this unforgiving land, where men and women alike were hardened by necessity and isolation, 25-year-old Randall Everett believed one thing above all. Attachment was a luxury a cowboy could not afford. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows as Randall adjusted his Stetson, the leather worn at the edges from years of work. His lean, muscular frame moved with the practiced efficiency of a man who knew the value of every motion. At 25, his face remained youthful despite the elements, with a strong jawline softened by hazel eyes that rarely revealed his thoughts. A light stubble, the result of 3 days' ride, dusted his otherwise clean-shaven face. "You heading back to the Drummond spread tonight?" asked Samuel, the livery stable owner, as Randall led his chestnut gelding toward the water trough. "No choice," Randall replied, his voice carrying the slight rasp of trail dust. "Cattle drive starts at first light, 2 weeks to Cheyenne." Samuel nodded knowingly. "Well, you might want to water your horse and yourself before heading out. Town's buzzing today." Randall didn't much care for town gossip. The less he knew about people, the easier it was to ride away. His father, a ranch hand who died with his boots on when Randall was 16, had taught him that lesson well. Cowboys don't put down roots, and they don't form attachments that can't be severed at dawn's first light. For 9 years, that philosophy had served him well. Randall had ridden for 6 different ranches across 3 territories, never staying long enough for the ground beneath his boots to feel like anything more than temporary soil. He was good with horses, better with cattle, and best at keeping his distance from the complications of human entanglements. The town's single dusty street showed signs of unusual activity. A small crowd had gathered outside Hillman's general store, their voices rising and falling like distant thunder. Randall wouldn't have given it a second thought, except for the flash of deep blue fabric that caught his eye through the parting bodies, a woman's dress, whipping like a cornflower in the wind as someone rushed from the scene. "Thief!" "Someone stop her," Mrs. Hillman's shrill voice cut through the murmurs. Before Randall could process what was happening, the blue-dressed figure collided with him, nearly knocking both of them to the ground. His hands instinctively steadied her shoulders, and he found himself staring into the widest, most terrified amber eyes he'd ever seen. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "They don't understand." Those eyes belonged to a young woman of perhaps 22 years, with honey-blonde hair partially escaping from a simple bun. Her face, though smudged with dirt on one cheek, possessed a delicate beauty, high cheekbones, a small straight nose, and full lips now trembling with fear. The blue calico dress she wore was faded but neatly mendied, the fabric thin at the elbows. "Step aside, Everett," Sheriff Mills called, pushing through the gathering onlookers, his gray mustache bristling with authority. "Violet Newcombe's been caught stealing again." The name struck a distant chord in Randall's memory. Violet Newcombe, the whispered scandal of Clearwater. He'd heard fragments during his occasional visits to town. Something about a deceased father with gambling debts, a mother who'd fled east, and questionable parentage. The details varied with each telling, growing more salacious with each whiskey poured. "I didn't steal anything," Violet insisted, her chin lifting with surprising dignity despite her situation. "I was returning Mrs. Peterson's handkerchief that she left behind yesterday." "Mrs." Hillman pushed to the front of the crowd, her plump face flushed with indignation. "And what about the bread in your pocket? I suppose that jumped in there by itself." Randall noticed then what his cowboy instincts had missed, the small, hard lump in the pocket of Violet's dress, poorly concealed. "I paid for it last week," Violet responded, her voice growing smaller under the weight of disbelieving stares. "Mr. Hillman said I could take it today." "My husband would never extend credit to someone like you, Mrs." Hillman spat. Randall felt Violet stiffen under his hands, which he belatedly realized were still resting on her shoulders. He should walk away. This wasn't his concern. The life of a cowboy meant riding past troubles, not into them. "She was helping me," Randall heard himself say, to his own astonishment. "Miss Newcombe was picking up something I asked for." The crowd's collective gaze swung to him like a weather vane in changing wind. Sheriff Mills narrowed his eyes, clearly skeptical. "Since when do you know Violet Newcombe?" A good question, one Randall couldn't answer truthfully, so he didn't try. since I needed someone to deliver a package while I tended to my horse. I gave her the money for the bread, too. Violet's startled glance told everyone this was news to her as well, but she recovered quickly. Yes, that's right. Mr. Everett asked me to help him since he was in a hurry. Mrs. Hillman wasn't convinced. Well then, where's the money? I certainly never received it. Randall reached into his pocket and produced 2 coins. Here's payment for the bread and a little extra for the misunderstanding. The storekeeper's wife snatched the money, still suspicious but unwilling to refuse good coin. The crowd, disappointed at the prospect of diminishing drama, began to disperse. Sheriff Mills lingered a moment longer. You're playing a dangerous game, Everett, he warned quietly. That girl's nothing but trouble, just like her mother. When they were finally alone, Violet stepped away from him, creating distance between them as surely as if she'd drawn a line in the dirt. Why did you do that? She asked, suspicion replacing the fear in those remarkable amber eyes. Randall shifted uncomfortably. He'd been asking himself the same question. Seemed like the right thing to do. No one in Clearwater does the right thing for me without expecting something in return, she replied, a bitterness in her voice that seemed far too heavy for someone so young. I'm not from Clearwater, he said simply, and I expect nothing. I'm riding out tonight. For a moment, something like disappointment flickered across her face, but it disappeared so quickly Randall thought he might have imagined it. Well, thank you anyway, Mr. Everett. She started to turn away, then paused. You should know, though, I really did pay for the bread. Mr. Hillman took my money last week, but his wife never believes me. Randall believed her, though he couldn't have explained why. Perhaps it was the stubborn dignity in her posture, or the way her eyes met his directly, challenging him to see the truth. Be careful, was all he said, tipping his hat slightly before turning back to his horse. As he mounted up and guided his gelding toward the edge of town, Randall told himself he had done his good deed for the year. He'd never see Violet Newcombe again, and that was for the best. Cowboys didn't rescue town outcasts. They didn't get involved in local disputes. They certainly didn't notice the exact shade of a woman's eyes or the way the fading sunlight caught in her hair. Yet as Clearwater disappeared behind him, Randall found himself wondering what circumstances had painted such sadness behind that defiant gaze, and why, for the first time in years, he felt a peculiar reluctance to ride away. 2 weeks later, the cattle drive completed ahead of schedule thanks to favorable weather. Randall found himself back in Clearwater rather than heading straight to the Drummond Ranch. He told himself it was for practical reasons. His boots needed resoling, and he could use a proper bath before reporting back to Mr. Drummond. It had nothing to do with amber eyes or a blue calico dress. The midday sun beat down on the single street as Randall emerged from the barber shop, freshly shaved and feeling more human than he had in days. The drive had been successful but exhausting, with long days in the saddle and longer nights standing watch. He was headed toward the cobbler's shop when a commotion from the direction of the town's small schoolhouse caught his attention. A group of children burst from the building, their laughter high and bright against the dusty afternoon. Among them was a small girl with honey-blonde braids who tripped and fell, scattering papers across the dirt. Instead of helping her, the other children circled like coyotes, their taunts carrying clearly on the still air. Bastard girl. Bastard girl. My ma says your ma ran off with a traveling man. Nobody wants you here. Randall felt his jaw tighten as he watched the little girl rise to her feet, her small face set with the same stubborn dignity he'd seen 2 weeks earlier in an older version. Before he could intervene, a swirl of blue fabric appeared and Violet Newcombe was there, positioning herself between the children and the little girl. That's quite enough, she said firmly. Charlotte, come with me. The rest of you should be ashamed. The children dispersed, but not before one boy shouted, My father says apples don't fall far from trees and you're both rotten. Violet flinched as though physically struck, but quickly masked it as she bent to help Charlotte gather her papers. When she straightened, her eyes met Randall's across the street. Recognition, surprise, and something unreadable flickered in her expression before she nodded once and turned away, leading the little girl by the hand toward a small house at the edge of town. Randall's boots carried him after them before his mind fully registered the decision. He caught up as Violet was opening the gate to a small, neat yard containing a struggling vegetable garden and a clothesline with precisely hung laundry. Miss Newcombe, he called, She turned, positioning Charlotte slightly behind her in a protective gesture that spoke volumes. "Mr. Everett, I thought you'd be long gone by now." "Cattle drive finished early," he explained, feeling oddly tongue-tied. He nodded toward the little girl. "Is this your sister?" "My daughter," Violet corrected, her chin lifting slightly as if expecting judgment. Randall struggled to hide his surprise. Violet couldn't be more than 22 or 23, which meant she must have been very young when she had Charlotte. "I see the family resemblance," he said carefully. "She has your eyes." Something in Violet's posture softened slightly at his neutral response. Charlotte peered around her mother's skirts, studying him with curious amber eyes that indeed matched Violet's exactly. "Are you the cowboy who helped Mama?" she asked boldly. "Charlotte," Violet admonished gently. "Mr. Everett is busy." "Actually," Randall said, surprising himself again, "I noticed your gate is hanging wrong. I could fix it for you if you'd like." Violet's eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Why would you do that?" It was a fair question, one Randall couldn't fully answer even to himself. The sensible part of him, the part that had survived 9 years of drifting, was shouting to walk away, to remember that attachments were dangerous and towns were just temporary stops on an endless trail. "Consider it payment for the bread I claimed to buy you," he offered finally. A ghost of a smile touched Violet's lips. "That seems like an uneven trade." "I'm not very good at arithmetic," Randall replied, and was rewarded with a genuine smile that transformed Violet's face from merely pretty to breathtaking. "Very well, Mr. Everett. You may fix our gate. Charlotte, please bring Mr. Everett a cup of water. He looks thirsty." As Charlotte scampered inside, Violet added quietly, "I hope you understand, Mr. Everett, that people will talk if you're seen here. Clearwater has decided what I am, and kindness toward me is viewed with suspicion." "I've never put much stock in what people say," Randall replied, removing his hat and setting to work on the gate's hinges. "And I'm just passing through anyway." Violet watched him for a moment, her expression unreadable. "Yes," she said finally, "I suppose everyone is in their own way." 3 hours later, Randall had not only fixed the gate but also repaired a leaking roof corner, secured a loose window shutter, and dug out a stubborn stump that was impeding the garden's growth. He declined Violet's offer to come inside, but had accepted water and a homemade biscuit from Charlotte, who'd appointed herself his assistant, solemnly handing him tools and asking an endless stream of questions about horses, cattle, and the Western Territories. "You've done far more than a gate's worth of work," Violet said as the afternoon light began to soften. She stood on the small porch, one hand resting on a post, the other holding a small bundle wrapped in cloth. "Please take this. It's just some corn bread and preserves, but it might make your ride more pleasant." Randall accepted the bundle, careful not to let his fingers brush hers. "Thank you. Your garden looks promising." "We manage," she said simply, but there was pride in her voice. "Charlotte, say goodbye to Mr. Everett. It's time for your reading practice." "Will you come back?" Charlotte asked, looking up at him with those earnest amber eyes. Randall glanced at Violet, whose face remained carefully neutral. "I can't say for certain. Cowboys don't usually stay in one place long." "But you could visit," Charlotte persisted. "Mama doesn't have any friends except for Mrs. Parker, who's really old, and Mr. Williams, who sells us eggs sometimes." "Charlotte," Violet's voice carried a warning note. "It's all right," Randall assured her. "She's just being honest." To Charlotte, he added, "I might stop by next time I'm in town, but that might not be for a while." As he rode away, Randall told himself he'd done a good turn for someone in need, nothing more. Yet the image of Violet standing on that porch, dignity intact despite the town's cruelty, stayed with him as he returned to the Drummond ranch. The bundle of food she'd given him contained not just cornbread, but also a small jar of cherry preserves that must have been precious to her limited stores. The thought made something twist uncomfortably in his chest. 2 days later, he volunteered when Mr. Drummond needed someone to go to town for supplies, ignoring the knowing look from the ranch foreman. This time he brought seed packets for Violet's garden, practical items that wouldn't seem too personal. He told himself it was just neighborly, the kind of thing anyone would do, except he wasn't a neighbor. He was a cowboy who'd spent 9 years ensuring he never stayed anywhere long enough to become one. When Violet opened her door to find him standing there with seed packets, her surprise quickly gave way to a genuine smile that made Randall momentarily forget whatever excuse he'd prepared. "I thought these might help your garden," he said finally, handing them over. "The beans should do well in your soil." "Thank you," she said, accepting them with careful hands. "Would you like to come in for coffee?" "Charlotte is at her lessons with Mrs. Parker." The small house was as neat inside as out, with simple furniture that had been mended multiple times but was arranged with care. A bookshelf held more volumes than Randall would have expected, and a patchwork quilt of extraordinary craftsmanship was draped over a rocking chair. "Did you make that?" he asked, nodding toward the quilt. Violet nodded as she moved about the small kitchen area. "I take in sewing and mending. The quilts sell better than anything else when people from outside Clearwater pass through." "It's beautiful work," Randall said honestly. "You could sell these in Cheyenne or Denver for good money." "Perhaps someday," she replied, but her tone suggested she didn't believe it. "Please sit down. The coffee will be ready shortly." As they talked, Randall learned that Violet had lived in Clearwater all her life. Her father had been the town's only doctor until his death 6 years earlier, leaving significant gambling debts that had forced Violet and her mother to sell most of their possessions. Her mother had left town shortly after Charlotte was born, unable to bear the scandal and ostracism. "Charlotte believes her father died before she was born," Violet said quietly. "It's simpler that way." "And did he?" Randall asked before he could stop himself. Violet's eyes met his directly. "No. He made promises he had no intention of keeping, then moved on when things became complicated. I was 17 and foolish enough to believe a handsome face and sweet words." The bitter edge in her voice made Randall wince. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. I have Charlotte, and she's worth everything I've endured." Violet poured more coffee. "What about you, Mr. Everett? What drives a man to avoid putting down roots for so long?" Randall was startled by the perceptive question. "How did you know?" "You have the look," she said simply. "I recognize it because I see it in the mirror. Someone who's learned to expect nothing so they won't be disappointed." The observation hit uncomfortably close to home. Randall stared into his coffee cup, considering how much to reveal. "My father was a ranch hand, never owned land, never stayed anywhere more than a season or two. He died when I was 16, thrown from a horse during a thunderstorm." "I'm sorry," Violet said, and unlike the empty platitudes Randall had heard when it happened, her words carried genuine feeling. "He always said attachment was a luxury cowboys couldn't afford, that the land would take everything eventually, so it was better not to give it anything to take." Randall hadn't spoken of his father in years, and the words felt strange on his tongue. "I guess I took the lesson to heart." "And has it made you happy?" Violet asked, her amber eyes searching his face. "Happy," Randall repeated the word as if testing an unfamiliar language. "I haven't really thought about it that way. It's kept me alive." "There's a difference between living and being alive, Mr. Everett." "Randall," he corrected, "if we're going to discuss philosophy, you might as well use my given name." Her smile warmed the room more effectively than the small stove in the corner. "Randall then, and I'm Violet." When Charlotte returned from her lessons an hour later, she was delighted to find Randall still there. Her chatter filled the small house as she showed him her schoolwork and proudly demonstrated her reading skills. Watching them together, Randall was struck by how different Violet was with her daughter, softer, lighter, the wariness temporarily set aside. By the time he left, the sun was setting, and Randall knew he'd stayed far longer than he'd intended. As he mounted his horse, Violet stepped closer, her face serious in the fading light. "I appreciate your kindness, Randall, but you should know that your association with me will damage your reputation in town. People here have long memories and narrow minds." "I told you before I'm just passing through," he reminded her, but the words sounded hollow even to his own ears. Violet's smile held a touch of sadness. "Yes, you did." "Good night, Randall." As spring deepened into summer, Randall found himself passing through Clearwater with increasing frequency. Each visit brought repairs to Violet's small house, seeds or tools for her garden, and occasionally a book for Charlotte, who was proving to be a voracious reader. Each time he told himself it would be the last visit, that he was getting dangerously close to something that felt like attachment. Yet he kept returning, drawn by Charlotte's unguarded delight at his visits, and, increasingly, by the quiet strength he discovered in Violet. Behind her careful reserve lay a sharp intelligence and unexpected humor. She knew every bird that visited her garden, could discuss the political news from the eastern papers that occasionally reached Clearwater, and possessed a dry wit that emerged when she felt comfortable. In turn, he found himself sharing stories of the territories he'd ridden through, the cattle drives that had taken him from Texas to Montana, the stars over the open prairie that looked close enough to touch. He described sunrises over mountains and the way distant thunderstorms painted the horizon with light, and was rewarded by the wonder in Violet's eyes as she imagined places she'd never seen. One evening in late July, as they sat on her small porch watching fireflies rise from the garden, Charlotte already asleep inside, Violet asked the question Randall had been dreading. "When will you be moving on, Randall?" He shifted uncomfortably on the step beside her. "Mr. Drummond has mentioned a cattle drive to Kansas City next month. I haven't given him an answer yet." "But you will go," she said. It wasn't a question. Randall stared at the darkening garden where beans were now climbing trellises he had built. "It's what I do. It's who I am." "Is it?" Violet's voice was soft but insistent. "Or is it just what you've convinced yourself you have to be?" The question hung between them, unanswered, as a shooting star blazed briefly across the darkening sky. Violet pointed it out with childlike delight, momentarily distracted from the weight of their conversation. Randall watched her face, illuminated by the last glow of sunset, and felt something shift inside him, a crack in the foundation of certainties he'd built his life upon. The next morning, as Randall was loading supplies at the general store, Sheriff Mills approached, his expression grave beneath his gray mustache. "You've been spending a lot of time at the Newcombe place," he said without preamble. Randall continued securing his purchases. "Is there a law against that, Sheriff?" "No law," Mills conceded, "but there's sense, and then there's foolishness. That woman has been trouble since before her girl was born." "Seems to me the trouble comes from how this town treats them, not the other way around," Randall replied, his voice level despite the anger building inside him. The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "You don't know what you're talking about, Everett. That woman's mother ran off with a traveling salesman while her father was treating patients during the fever outbreak of '67. Then Violet herself got herself in trouble with some drifter not much different than yourself. The Newcombes brought shame on this town twice over." "And that justifies treating her daughter like an outcast?" Randall demanded, his control slipping. "Charlotte's just a child." "Apples and trees, Everett," Mills said, shaking his head. "Mark my words, no good will come of your involvement there. I'd have thought a man like you would know better than to get tangled in something so messy." As the sheriff walked away, Mrs. Hillman emerged from the store, her pinched face radiating disapproval. "I won't be extending credit to the Drummond Ranch if their money is going to support that woman's household," she announced loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. Randall finished securing his supplies in grim silence, the full weight of Clearwater's prejudice settling on his shoulders. As he mounted his horse, he noticed a familiar blue dress across the street. Violet stood frozen, Charlotte's hand in hers, having clearly overheard everything. The hurt in her eyes was quickly masked as she turned away, practically dragging Charlotte in the opposite direction. Randall caught up to them at the edge of town, where the road split toward her small house. "Violet, wait." She stopped but didn't turn around. Charlotte looked between them, confusion plain on her young face. "Why are you upset, Mama?" she asked. "Did Mr. Randall do something wrong?" "No, sweetheart," Violet said, her voice carefully controlled. "Mr. Everett hasn't done anything wrong. But he's very busy, and we need to let him get back to his work." "Violet, please," Randall said quietly. "What you heard back there was nothing I haven't heard 100 times before," she finished, finally turning to face him. Her eyes were dry but filled with resignation that was somehow worse than tears. "This is why I warned you, Randall. Association with me comes at a cost." "I don't care about that," he insisted. "Perhaps not now," she acknowledged. "But you will when the Drummond Ranch can no longer get supplies, or when the other cowhands start questioning why you spend so much time in town. This is my life, Randall. It has been for years, and I've made my peace with it. But I won't be responsible for dragging you down with me." "You're not dragging me anywhere," Randall argued. "I make my own choices." Violet's smile was small and sad. and we both know what those choices will ultimately be. You'll ride away just like you always planned. The only difference is that now it will be with regret instead of freedom, and I don't want that for you." She squeezed Charlotte's hand. "Come along, sweetheart. We need to get home before the rain starts." As if summoned by her words, thunder rumbled in the distance. Randall watched them walk away, Charlotte glancing back at him with confusion while Violet kept her eyes resolutely forward. He wanted to follow, to argue further, but the certainty in Violet's voice had shaken him. Was she right? Would he eventually ride away, proving her point and breaking two hearts in the process? The thought made his chest ache in a way no physical injury ever had. That night, a summer storm crashed over the prairie, rattling windows and sending cattle seeking shelter in the lee of whatever windbreaks they could find. Randall stood in the doorway of the bunkhouse, watching lightning split the darkness, and made his decision. At first light, he rode to Mr. Drummond's house and requested a private word. The August sun beat down relentlessly as Randall approached Violet's house 3 days later. The garden was wilting slightly in the heat, and several shingles had come loose in the recent storm. He'd rehearsed what he would say a dozen times, but as he reached the gate, the one he'd fixed that first day, all his carefully prepared words deserted him. The door opened before he could knock, revealing Violet with a basket of mending in her arms. Her surprise at seeing him quickly gave way to wariness. "Randall, I didn't expect to see you again." "I know," he acknowledged. "May I come in? There's something I need to tell you." Inside, the house was unusually quiet. "Where's Charlotte?" Randall asked, suddenly nervous. "At Mrs. Parker's for her lessons," Violet replied, setting down her basket. "What is it you wanted to tell me?" Randall took a deep breath. "I'm not going on the cattle drive to Kansas City." Violet blinked, clearly not expecting this news. "Why not?" "Because I've taken a different position. Mr. Drummond has offered me the job of foreman at his new breeding operation." "Foreman," Violet repeated, her brow furrowing. "But that would mean—" "Staying in one place," Randall finished. "Yes. There's a small house that comes with the position at the south end of the Drummond property. It needs work, but it has good bones. 2 bedrooms, a solid roof, and land enough for a larger garden than you have here." Understanding dawned slowly in Violet's eyes, along with something like fear. "Randall, what are you saying?" He crossed the room to stand before her, close enough to see the flecks of gold in her amber eyes. "I'm saying that my father was wrong. Attachment isn't a luxury, it's what makes life worth living. These past months, watching you fight for yourself and Charlotte against everything this town throws at you, it's shown me what real strength looks like." "The town will never accept me," Violet warned, though her voice had softened. "You'll be ostracized, too, by association." "Let them try," Randall said with a conviction that surprised even him. "The Drummond Ranch is the largest employer in the county. If the general store won't sell to us because of who I choose to marry, there are plenty of other stores that will." Violet's eyes widened. "Mary." Randall suddenly realized he'd skipped several steps in his carefully planned speech. He laughed, running a hand through his hair in embarrassment. "I'm doing this all wrong. I had a whole speech prepared." "I think you'd better finish it," Violet said, a smile beginning to curve her lips despite her obvious effort to remain guarded. Randall took her hands in his, marveling at how small they seemed compared to his own, yet how much strength they contained. "Violet Newcombe, I love you. I love your courage and your intelligence, your kindness and your fierce protection of Charlotte. I love the woman who faced down this entire town rather than break under its judgment. And if you'll have me, I want to build a life with you, not as a drifting cowboy, but as a man who's finally found something worth staying for." Tears filled Violet's eyes, but they were accompanied by a smile that transformed her entire face. "Are you certain this won't be easy? The town has a long memory." "Then we'll make new memories," Randall promised. "Better ones. I can't erase the past or change what you've been through, but I can promise you won't face the future alone." Violet studied his face for a long moment, as if searching for any sign of doubt. Finding none, she squeezed his hands. "Charlotte will be overjoyed. She adores you." "And I adore her," Randall assured her. "I know I can never replace her father, but I would be honored to help raise her and protect her as my own." "Her father was nothing more than a broken promise," Violet said quietly. "You, Randall Everett, are the man who keeps his word. That makes all the difference in the world." She rose on tiptoes and pressed her lips to his in a kiss that tasted of hope and new beginnings. When they parted, Randall rested his forehead against hers, content in a way he'd never experienced before. "Is that a yes, then?" he asked, suddenly realizing she hadn't actually answered his proposal. Violet laughed, the sound bright and free in the small house that had seen too little joy. "Yes, Randall, it's a yes." 3 weeks later, as September painted the prairie with the first hints of gold, Randall and Violet were married in a simple ceremony at the Drummond Ranch. Charlotte served as the only attendant, proudly carrying flowers she had picked herself from the garden at their new home. Mr. Drummond stood as witness, his weathered face unusually soft as he watched his new foreman pledge his life to the woman who had endured so much. Few townspeople attended, but Mrs. Parker was there along with Mr. Williams, who sold eggs, and surprisingly, Sheriff Mills, who offered a gruff congratulations that seemed to indicate, if not approval, at least acceptance. "This town might take a while to come around," he told Randall privately, "but they respect a man who stands by his convictions. You've shown you're not just passing through, and that counts for something." As Randall and Violet rode back to their home, Charlotte between them on her own small pony, a wedding gift from Mr. Drummond, Randall reflected on how completely his life had changed in the span of a few months. The endless horizon that had once represented freedom now seemed empty compared to the fullness of the life unfolding before him. "What are you thinking about?" Violet asked, guiding her horse alongside his. In her simple cream-colored dress, with flowers woven through her honey-blonde hair, she looked like a vision of everything he'd never allowed himself to want. "I'm thinking about roots," Randall answered honestly. "How I spent so many years avoiding them, never realizing they're what give you the strength to weather any storm." Violet smiled, reaching across to take his hand as they rode side by side. "Then we'll put down roots together, deep enough that nothing can uproot them. And I'll grow the biggest garden ever," Charlotte added enthusiastically, bouncing slightly in her saddle with excitement. "Mrs. Drummond said she'd give me strawberry plants in the spring." As they crested the small rise that revealed their home in the distance, the house already improved with a new porch and fresh paint, the garden expanded and fenced, smoke rising from the chimney where Mrs. Drummond's cook had prepared a wedding supper, Randall felt a sense of rightness settle over him. The sun was beginning to set, painting the prairie in shades of amber that matched Violet's eyes. In that moment, Randall understood what his father had never learned. The frontier wasn't just a place of hardship and loss. It could also be a place of redemption and new beginnings, where beauty could be found in the most unexpected places, including in the heart of a town outcast who had taught a drifting cowboy the true meaning of courage. As they rode the final distance to their home, Randall knew with absolute certainty that he had found what every cowboy secretly seeks on the endless trail, not just shelter but belonging, not just survival but love. And in Violet's eyes, he had found the most beautiful view the West had to offer, the promise of tomorrow together.